Our first unit is going to be what we are calling a light, what you can also call optics of light. And under light, we shall look at the first unit called reflection on a plane mirror. Reflection on a plane mirror. Good. That is our first subunit under that. Okay. Before beginning with this direct, I'm very aware that the word light is not something at least everyone has ever used the word light. If we talk about the word light, what comes into your mind? Like if you hear that someone is mentioning something like light, what comes into your brain? If we are to look at what exact light is. If we are to define light in simple terms, light can be anything that helps us to see. Is that okay? That is when we are trying to define light in simple language, that anything that can give us vision, that can enable us to see, we can give it a name, light. Is that okay? Or you can say it is an electromagnetic radiation. It is an electromagnetic radiation that helps in vision. Is that it? Is that okay? So that is what you can define as a light. Are we together? Electromagnetic radiation that helps in vision. Or you can also say light is a form of energy. Light is a form of energy that travels in a straight line. All of those are simple definition for what we are calling light. Is that okay? Are we together? So that is what you can ask if someone asks you, light. What is light exactly? That is what you can talk about. Good. Are we together? And then let's look at the sources of light. Because now it is very true that if light, you see light somewhere, it must be originating from light, from a certain source. Is that it? Light cannot just exist without a source. So, what are those sources of light? One, we can have the luminous source, and then the non-luminous sources. What are the luminous sources? And what are the non-luminous sources? Luminous sources are the sources that produce their own light. Is that it? Any source that produces its own light is what we're calling luminous source. And what is the example? We can have the what? We can have the sun. Sun is an example of a luminous source because it produces its own radiation. Is that okay? And then next, you can maybe give another example of a glowworm. Glowworm. These worms that sometimes you see them, some of them move with light at night. They produce their personal light. That is also, those kind of worms are also called luminous sources of light. Is that okay? I can bring there maybe ETC among others. You can also think about other sources that produces their own source of light. Is that okay? And then now let's look at what is very true under the non-luminous sources. Non-luminous sources are the sources that produce light after observing it from some other sources. Is that okay? So what is now that? We can now talk about the moon. We can talk about the stars. All those ones observe and then later on emits. Isn't it? They don't produce their own light, but they first absorb from other sources, like maybe the moon first gets from the sun and then emits it. Is that okay? The star may not be relevant, but the moon is one of them that helps us as an example of that. Actually, even the star would be. Because the star also first absorbs from the what? The star also first absorbs from the sun and then lights in the night. So all these one are the star. The star is okay. The star is also an example of the non-luminous. We say luminous are the one that produces their own source of light. They produce light for themselves. An example is the sun and the glow worms. And then we also said non-luminous sources, for them, what they do is they first receive the light from other sources and they keep, and then afterwards they send it back. And an example under that we said is the moon. The moon first, during daytime, it first charges with the what? With the sun. And then afterward at night, it starts now lighting. So therefore it is not producing its own light, therefore it is non-luminous. And then also the same thing applies with the star. During the time they are absorbing light from the sun and then afterwards they emit it. All those are examples of non-luminous sources of, this is sources, types of sources. I can call it types of sources of light. Sources of light. Is that okay? So there are those two as types of sources of light. Is that okay? And then also, before we're looking at any other detail of light, we also have different types of materials under light. Materials under light. We can also look at one of them as being opaque materials. The materials involved under light. So we are going to look at some terminologies that will help us when we are analyzing our topic of light. What are opaque materials? What are opaque materials? How can we define opaque materials? Opaque materials are the materials which allow no light to pass through them. Repeat after me. Opaque material are a material which do not allow light to pass through them. What are the examples of opaque materials that you can give that? Anything that will not allow light to pass through them are what we are calling opaque. Isn't it? Yourself, you are an example of opaque material. Human being. Human being is an example of opaque material. Because if you so happen that there is a source of light coming somewhere and you happen to stand in front of the light, or in front of the light, it is very true that the person behind you will say, I will not now see the light. Why? Because you are opaque and light cannot pass in through you. Is that okay? That is also an example. And then you can talk about others like the wall. These other block walls, they also don't allow light to pass in through them. You can talk about the what? You can talk about the wood. There are very many examples of opaque materials or materials which do not allow light to pass through them. So think about very many examples. Examples of anything. Think about anything that can block light from passing through them. And then we can also look at what we call transparent materials. What are transparent materials? Transparent materials are materials which allow sunlight to pass through them. Is that okay? Are materials which allow some light to pass through them. Is that okay? And what could be examples of those materials that allow some light to pass through them? One We could talk maybe a white polythene bag. A white polythene bag can also allow some light to pass in through it. So therefore it is a transparent material. Which other example can we give under transparent materials? Materials that allow light to pass through them. Next, we could also talk about clear water. Also, a clear water. Through a clear water, you can easily see something. Isn't it? So that means that it's also allowing some light to pass in through it. Is that okay? So it is therefore also an example of transparent material. You may think about very many others. Under that, only those are examples of transparent materials. And then lastly, other types of materials, we can also look at translucent material. Translucent materials. What are translucent materials? If you're someone talking about translucent material, what comes into your mind? Translucent materials are materials which allow very little light to pass through them. Is that okay? So it is an intermediate between opaque and transparent. Is that okay? It allows it, but not so much, very little light to pass through it. That is what we are calling translucent materials. Is that okay? Transparent allows most. Opaque does not even allow. Translucent allows but very little. That is what we are calling translucent. What would be the example of a translucent material? Can anyone think about an example of translucent material? One, we would give an example of translucent material as tinted glasses. Do you know what a tinted glass is? A tinted glass is this kind of glass you find they are the bathroom glasses. You can see but not very clear. The light is passing but it is very hard to identify. These glasses they put in sometime like in the windows of the churches. Those are tinted glasses. Is that okay? That one also allows light, but it allows very little light in that you cannot easily identify something. So that is an example of the materials that we shall be dealing with under light. After looking at all that, we shall now look at another material under our topic of light in the next.